On March 10, 2026, the Indian cabinet officially issued a statement announcing revisions to investment rules for countries sharing a land border with India. This marks the first substantive relaxation of relevant policies since India introduced Press Release Note 3 in April 2020, which comprehensively tightened investment restrictions on China. The news immediately drew widespread attention from the global trade and economic community, and once again brought Sino-Indian bilateral relations into the international spotlight. This policy relaxation is not a blanket opening, but rather exhibits characteristics of precision and selectivity, with specific measures covering multiple key sectors. Regarding industry access, investment restrictions in key sectors such as electric vehicle components, renewable energy, and pharmaceutical intermediates have been formally lifted, allowing Chinese enterprises to enter these previously strictly controlled industries. Regarding investment thresholds, the previous 51% cap on foreign ownership has been raised to 74%. In certain technology-intensive sectors, such as renewable energy and pharmaceutical intermediates, Chinese enterprises are now permitted to hold 100% foreign ownership, breaking long-standing strict constraints on foreign equity stakes. Regarding approval procedures, the most notable change is the elimination of the additional review requirement for beneficial owners who are Chinese citizens. Previously, regardless of the scale or sector of investment, any investment by Chinese enterprises in India, as long as the beneficial owner involved a Chinese citizen, was subject to additional approval by the Indian government. This step was often time-consuming and cumbersome, acting as a major bottleneck restricting the inflow of Chinese capital. With the removal of this requirement, eligible Chinese investments can now enter an automatic approval channel, significantly shortening the approval cycle and enhancing investment convenience. To truly understand the significance of this policy relaxation, it must be compared with the investment restrictions imposed following the 2020 China-India border conflict, which clearly illustrates the extent of the change. In April 2020, following the escalation of the Sino-Indian border conflict, the Indian government issued the highly targeted Press Release No. 3. Although the release did not explicitly mention China, Indian public opinion widely regarded its core objective as restricting Chinese investment. Their release stipulated that any investment in Indian entities, by entities from countries sharing a land border with India, or by actual beneficiaries located in such countries or who are citizens of such countries, must obtain prior approval from the Indian government. Furthermore, any direct or indirect transfer of existing or future foreign ownership in Indian entities where the beneficiary is from a country sharing a land border with India must also receive prior government approval. This policy covers virtually all scenarios involving Chinese investment in India, whether it be new investments, mergers and acquisitions, or changes in equity ownership, all fall under the strict approval framework. Even investment projects with extremely low Chinese equity stakes and no controlling interest cannot avoid the cumbersome approval process. In addition, the Indian government has simultaneously implemented a series of supporting restrictive measures, including banning 59 Chinese-developed apps, obstructing the customs clearance of Chinese cargo containers at Indian ports, halting infrastructure projects, such as road construction involving Chinese companies, and boycotting exports of Chinese power and telecommunications equipment, thereby forming a comprehensive, multi-layered system of investment restrictions targeting China. According to statistics, following the introduction of these policies in 2020, Chinese direct investment in India plummeted sharply, dropping from nearly $1.5 billion in 2019 to less than $300 million in 2021. Many projects that had reached preliminary cooperation agreements were forced to stall, and Chinese enterprises operating in India found themselves in dire straits. The relaxation of restrictions in 2026 effectively dismantles some of the investment barriers established since Arlene. In particular, adjustments regarding market access and key sectors, equity ownership limits, and approval processes stand in stark contrast to the previous strict restrictions. This shift not only exceeded market expectations, but also prompts a critical question. Does India's relaxation of investment policies toward China signify a fundamental shift in its strategy toward China? Or is it a reluctant compromise forced by the heavy pressure of domestic economic difficulties? To answer this question, we need to conduct a comprehensive and in-depth analysis from multiple dimensions, including the historical context of India's investment restrictions on China, its current economic challenges, the specific details of the policy relaxation, and the underlying strategic and economic considerations. The history of India's investment restrictions on China dates back to 2005. Over the subsequent 2 decades, as Sino-Indian bilateral relations fluctuated, India's domestic economic conditions shifted, and the international landscape evolved. Relevant policies underwent multiple adjustments, resulting in a complex evolutionary trajectory. Several key milestones are particularly noteworthy. In 2005, Sino-Indian bilateral relations entered a period of rapid development. The two countries signed the Sino-Indian Declaration on Strengthening Cooperation in the 21st Century, which explicitly called for expanding bilateral economic and trade cooperation. At that time, the Indian government maintained a relatively open attitude toward Chinese investment. With the exception of a few sensitive sectors, Chinese enterprises were permitted to enter most industries freely, and in some sectors, Chinese capital was even granted the same treatment as other foreign investments. During this period, Chinese investment in India began to increase gradually, primarily concentrated in labor-intensive sectors such as infrastructure, construction, and manufacturing. Although the scale of investment was modest, it laid the foundation for subsequent bilateral economic and trade cooperation. In 2017, the Doklam border standoff between China and India erupted, leading to significant tensions in bilateral relations. The Indian government began tightening its investment policies toward China, subjecting infrastructure projects involving Chinese enterprises to strict scrutiny. Some projects already underway were suspended, and certain high-tech sectors were included in the scope of investment restrictions. Although these restrictions were highly targeted at the time, they had not yet formed a comprehensive regulatory system, leaving some room for the development of Chinese investment in India. In 2020, the escalation of the Sino-Indian border conflict marked a major turning point in policy adjustments. The Indian government issued Press Release Number 3, introducing comprehensive investment restrictions on China. This brought nearly all Chinese investment in India under government approval, establishing a one-size-fits-all regulatory model. This policy persisted for nearly 6 years, becoming the greatest obstacle to Sino-Indian economic and trade cooperation. Starting in Arlian-Are, calls for relaxing investment restrictions on China began to emerge within India, with Indian media reporting on the issue almost annually. The primary reason was that India's domestic industrial development faced technological bottlenecks and capital shortages, and many sectors urgently needed Chinese technological and financial support. Divergent views also began to surface within the Indian government, with some officials arguing that excessive restrictions on Chinese investment were detrimental to domestic economic development. However, due to opposition from conservative factions and the influence of geopolitical factors, policy adjustments failed to materialize. It was not until March 2026, against the backdrop of increasingly severe domestic economic difficulties, that the Indian government officially introduced measures to ease investment restrictions on China. This move was both a response to domestic economic needs and a significant adjustment to Sino-Indian bilateral economic and trade relations. The severe economic challenges India faced in 2026 were one of the core drivers behind this relaxation of investment policies toward China, and a series of key economic indicators clearly illustrate the economic pressures India currently faces. According to official data released by the Indian government, India's real GDP growth rate fell to 5.2% in the first quarter of 2026. A significant decline from the 7.8% recorded in the same period of 2025. This represents the lowest growth rate in the past 5 years and falls far short of the Indian government's previously set 7% growth target. Behind a slowdown in economic growth lies a concerted weakness across multiple sectors. Industrial production growth slowed to 2.1%. The manufacturing PMI has remained below the boom-bust line for 3 consecutive months. The service sector lacks growth momentum, and the consumer market remains sluggish. Weak domestic demand has directly dragged down economic growth. Regarding foreign exchange reserves, influenced by factors such as global commodity price volatility, a widening trade deficit, and capital outflows, India's foreign exchange reserves have continued to decline since the start of 2026. As of the end of March, foreign exchange reserves had decreased by 12% compared to the end of 2025, falling to approximately $580 billion. Although this amount still covers nearly 8 months of import needs, the sustained decline in reserves has sparked market concerns about India's exchange rate stability and has limited the Indian government's policy space to address economic risks. Regarding unemployment, India's unemployment rate rose to 7.8% in March 2026, with youth unemployment reaching as high as 23.5%. The large number of workers unable to find suitable jobs has not only affected household income levels, but also poses a potential threat to social stability. Furthermore, in its Country Economic Assessment Report released at the end of 2025, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, noted that the Indian economy would face significant short-term risks. The deepening of geo-economic fragmentation could lead to tighter financial conditions and rising input costs, while unpredictable climate change risks could also have a substantial impact on Indian agriculture, further suppressing rural consumption and driving up agricultural commodity prices. These predictions gradually materialized in 2026, posing greater challenges to the Indian government's economic governance. Against this economic backdrop, attracting foreign investment, introducing technology, and creating jobs became key strategies for the Indian government to alleviate economic pressures. As the world's second largest economy, China possesses ample capital and advanced technology, naturally making it a priority target for the Indian government, a factor that provided significant economic impetus for the recent relaxation of investment policies toward China. Although India has long maintained investment restrictions on China, Chinese capital still holds a significant position within India's foreign investment structure, particularly in certain key sectors where Chinese participation plays a vital role in India's industrial development. According to foreign investment statistics for 2025, released by India's Ministry of Commerce and Industry, China accounts for 3.2% of India's total foreign investment. While this figure may seem modest, given the strict investment restrictions in place since 2020, it demonstrates the resilience of Chinese investment in India. In terms of investment sectors, Chinese investment in India is primarily concentrated in four key areas. First, the electronics manufacturing sector, including smartphone components and electronic components. Chinese enterprises play a vital role in the supply chain of India's electronics manufacturing industry. Many core components for Indian mobile phone brands rely on supplies from Chinese companies. And some Chinese firms have even established production bases in India, driving the development of the country's electronics manufacturing sector. Second, the renewable energy sector, primarily comprising solar and wind power. China holds a technological edge in photovoltaic modules and wind power equipment. Previously, some Chinese companies entered the Indian renewable energy market through joint ventures, supporting India's energy transition. Third, the infrastructure sector. Although subject to strict restrictions since 2020, Chinese companies had previously participated in the construction of numerous Indian infrastructure projects, including roads, railways, and ports, contributing to India's infrastructure upgrades. Fourth, the pharmaceutical intermediates sector. China is the world's largest producer of pharmaceutical intermediates, and India, as a major global manufacturer of generic drugs, has a strong demand for Chinese pharmaceutical intermediates. Some Chinese companies have participated in India's pharmaceutical industry supply chain through indirect investment. Additionally, Chinese companies have made investments in India's startup sector, primarily in the internet and fintech sectors, providing financial support for the development of Indian startups. It is worth noting that following the introduction of investment restriction policies in 2020, Chinese investment in India has primarily consisted of indirect and small-scale investments, with direct investment declining significantly. However, this policy relaxation is expected to drive a rebound in Chinese direct investment in India, further increasing China's share in India's foreign investment structure. This relaxation of India's investment policies toward China is not merely a simple easing of restrictions, but rather involves clear targeting and specific implementation details. Each adjustment is centered on India's domestic industrial needs and economic objectives. Specifically, it primarily encompasses the following three core aspects. Regarding the list of open sectors, the Indian government has precisely selected three key areas: electric vehicle components, renewable energy, and pharmaceutical intermediates for liberalization. These sectors represent industries that India urgently needs to develop, while also being areas where China possesses distinct technological and industrial advantages. In the electric vehicle component sector, India has been actively promoting the development of the new energy vehicle industry in recent years. It introduced the India Scheme for the Promotion of Electric Passenger Vehicle Manufacturing, explicitly calling for the expansion of local production of electric vehicle components. However, Indian domestic enterprises face significant shortcomings in the R&D and production of core components, lacking advanced technology and production capacity. In contrast, China possesses mature technologies and a complete supply chain for core components such as electric vehicle batteries, motors, and electronic control systems. Opening up this sector will attract Chinese enterprises to invest in India, fill gaps in the local industry, and drive the rapid development of India's new energy vehicle sector. In the renewable energy sector, India faces the dual challenges of energy shortages and environmental pressures. Vigorously developing renewable energy sources such as solar and wind power is a key direction. However, India still lags significantly in renewable energy equipment manufacturing and technological R&D. Chinese enterprises' technological advantages and industrial scale in areas such as photovoltaic modules and wind power equipment can support the development of India's renewable energy industry, helping India increase its installed capacity and utilization efficiency of renewable energy. In the pharmaceutical intermediates sector, while India's generic drug industry is well developed, its production capacity for pharmaceutical intermediates is insufficient, with the country relying heavily on imports. As the world's largest producer of pharmaceutical intermediates, China can provide a stable supply of raw materials for India's generic drug industry. Opening up this sector will not only reduce production costs for Indian generic drug companies, but also help improve the integrity of India's pharmaceutical industry supply chain. Regarding adjustments to investment thresholds, the Indian government has significantly relaxed foreign equity ownership limits for Chinese enterprises, raising the cap from 51% to 74%. This means Chinese companies can gain greater control in relevant sectors and will have stronger incentives to make long-term investments. Specifically, in sectors such as electric vehicle components and pharmaceutical intermediates, the foreign ownership limit has been raised to 74%. Chinese companies can now become the largest shareholders, participating in corporate management and decision-making. This adjustment breaks India's long-standing strict restrictions on foreign ownership and boosts the enthusiasm of Chinese companies to invest in India. In the renewable energy sector, the Indian government has even permitted Chinese companies to achieve 100% foreign ownership. One of the most groundbreaking aspects of this policy relaxation. Previously, the cap on foreign ownership in India's renewable energy sector was 51%, meaning Chinese companies could only participate through joint ventures and were unable to gain full control. The current allowance for 100% foreign ownership signifies that Chinese companies can independently establish production bases and R&D centers in India and autonomously determine their development strategies. This will not only attract more Chinese capital inflows, but also facilitate the implementation of China's advanced technologies in India. It is important to note that this adjustment to ownership limits is not a blanket liberalization, but is limited to the three key sectors explicitly identified in the policy. Foreign ownership restrictions in other sectors remain unchanged, particularly in sensitive areas such as defense, telecommunications, and energy transmission, where strict restrictions on Chinese companies are maintained, a move that reflects the Indian government's cautious approach. Regarding the simplification of approval procedures, the removal of the additional review requirement for beneficial owners who are Chinese citizens is one of the most significant practical adjustments in this policy relaxation. Since 2020, this additional review has been a major bottleneck constraining Chinese investment in India. Many Chinese companies' investment projects have been put on hold for extended periods due to this requirement, with approval cycles often lasting more than 6 months. Some projects ultimately failed to secure approval. With the removal of this step, eligible Chinese investment projects, provided they do not involve sensitive sectors, can now enter the automatic approval channel, shortening the approval cycle to within 30 working days and significantly improving investment convenience. Additionally, the Indian government has explicitly stipulated that approvals for investments in sectors such as electronic components, electronic capital goods, polysilicon, and silicon wafers must be completed within 60 days, further streamlining the approval process. The Indian cabinet stated that the new approval process will help improve India's business environment, attract more foreign direct investment, enable Indian companies to access new technologies, facilitate their expansion and integration into global supply chains, and enhance India's competitiveness as an investment and manufacturing destination. However, the India-China Chamber of Commerce also pointed out that this simplification of the approval process still has limitations. Large-scale Chinese investments and projects involving actual controlling stakes will still require strict scrutiny, and the actual implementation of the policy remains to be seen. India's recent relaxation of investment policies toward China is driven by economic realities, strategic considerations, and domestic political resistance, all of which intertwine to determine the nature and direction of this policy. Adjustment. From an economic perspective, the drivers primarily focus on 3 areas. First, attracting Chinese technology to address shortcomings in domestic industries. India lags behind in technological capabilities in sectors such as electric vehicle components, renewable energy, and pharmaceutical intermediates, whereas China possesses mature technologies and complete industrial chains in these fields. By relaxing investment restrictions on China, India can attract Chinese enterprises to invest in the country, driving the transfer and diffusion of advanced technologies, and helping local Indian firms upgrade their technical capabilities and improve their industrial chains. For example, in the electric vehicle components sector, investment by Chinese enterprises can help India establish a complete supply chain, ranging from batteries and electric motors to electronic control systems, thereby promoting the localization of India's new energy vehicle industry. In the renewable energy sector, investment by Chinese photovoltaic enterprises can help India enhance its production capacity for photovoltaic modules and reduce its reliance on imported equipment. Second, to alleviate foreign exchange pressure and replenish domestic capital. Since 2026, India's foreign exchange reserves have continued to decline, and its trade deficit has widened. Attracting foreign investment is a key means of alleviating foreign exchange pressure and replenishing domestic capital. China possesses ample capital. Relaxing investment restrictions on China could attract more Chinese direct investment inflows. increase India's foreign exchange reserves, alleviate the pressure of foreign exchange shortages, and simultaneously provide financial support for the development of India's domestic industries, thereby driving economic growth. Third, it creates jobs and alleviates employment pressure. India currently faces persistently high unemployment, particularly among the youth. Investment projects in sectors such as electric vehicle components and renewable energy can create a large number of jobs. It is estimated that following this policy relaxation, investments in these sectors will generate 120,000 new direct jobs in India, while also driving the creation of more indirect jobs across upstream and downstream industries, thereby alleviating domestic employment pressures and stabilizing social order. From a strategic perspective, India's relaxation of investment policies toward China is also a key component of its foreign policy adjustments, primarily driven by three objectives. First, to balance China's influence and achieve strategic hedging. For a long time, India has adopted a strategy of cooperation coupled with vigilance in its relations with China. The investment restrictions implemented since 2020 were essentially a precaution against the expansion of China's influence. However, excessive restrictions on Chinese capital have also harmed India's own economic development. This policy relaxation reflects the Indian government's pragmatic approach. By opening up moderately, it aims to attract Chinese capital and technology while simultaneously preventing Chinese capital from gaining control over India's key industries. Through measures such as equity ownership limits and sector-specific controls, this achieves a balance between attracting cooperation and mitigating risks, thereby counterbalancing China's influence in South Asia. Second, it seeks to integrate Make in India with the Belt and Road Initiative to elevate India's international standing. Since taking office, the Modi administration has vigorously promoted the Make in India initiative, aiming to establish India as a global manufacturing hub. Meanwhile, the Belt and Road Initiative serves as a major global platform for cooperation, encompassing infrastructure development, trade collaboration, and technological exchange across multiple sectors. This relaxation of investment policies toward China will encourage Chinese enterprises to participate in the Make in India initiative, strengthen Sino-Indian cooperation in the manufacturing sector, and simultaneously facilitate the integration of Make in India with the Belt and Road Initiative. This will elevate India's position within global supply chains and enhance its international influence. Third, it will improve bilateral relations and ease geopolitical tensions. Since 2020, bilateral relations between China and India have been strained due to border conflicts, severely impacting economic and trade cooperation, which serves as a crucial stabilizing force in Sino-Indian relations. This policy relaxation sends a positive signal from the Indian government to China, helping to improve bilateral relations, alleviate geopolitical tensions, and create favorable conditions for cooperation between the two countries in other areas. Indian Foreign Minister Jaishankar once stated in Berlin, Germany, that India has not shut the door on business from China. Rather, the issue lies in India's need to clarify in which sectors to engage with Beijing and under what conditions. This also reflects the Indian government's willingness to improve relations with China. Although the Indian government has introduced measures to relax investment policies towards China, this policy faces significant domestic political resistance, primarily from conservative factions within the Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP, and the opposition Indian National Congress. Conservative elements within the BJP have long adhered to Hindu nationalist ideology, maintaining a vigilant and exclusionary stance towards China. They believe that relaxing investment restrictions on China will lead to Chinese capital and technology gaining control over India's key industries, thereby threatening India's national security and economic sovereignty. Conservative lawmakers have repeatedly voiced opposition in Parliament, arguing that this policy, relaxation, constitutes a compromise with China that would harm India's national interests. They have demanded that the Indian government rescind the relevant policies and maintain strict restrictions on Chinese investment. They point out that Chinese enterprises hold clear advantages in technology and capital. Should they enter the Indian market in large numbers, they would squeeze out local Indian businesses, leading to their bankruptcy and job losses, which would hinder the realization of India's self-reliance goal. Furthermore, conservatives worry that the entry of Chinese enterprises would exacerbate India's economic dependence on China. Should bilateral relations between India and China become strained again, India's economic security would face a serious threat. The opposition Congress Party, however, has seized upon this policy relaxation as a key opportunity to attack the Modi government, using the issue of Chinese investment to criticize the administration's governance capabilities. Congress Party leader Ramesh stated that while the Modi government has adopted a tough stance towards China in recent years, even declaring its intention to decouple from the Chinese economy, its current relaxation of investment restrictions is a contradiction and, in essence, a desperate measure resulting from the government's inability to resolve domestic economic difficulties. The Congress Party also used the Adani Group's establishment of a subsidiary in China to accuse the Modi government of prioritizing the interests of conglomerates over national interests. It claimed that the Adani Group's deepening investment in China is closely linked to the Modi government's policy adjustments toward China, and that this action would undermine India's national security and territorial sovereignty. In fact, the Congress Party's criticism stems largely from internal political strife in India. Ever since the prominent U.S. short-selling firm Hindenburg Research accused the Adani Group of fraudulent trading and stock price manipulation, the Congress Party has consistently attacked the Modi government, using the Adani Group as a key target in its criticism of Modi. This latest attack, leveraging the relaxation of investment policies toward China, is essentially aimed at undermining Modi's political foundation rather than genuinely safeguarding India's national interests. In addition to the BJP's conservative faction and the Congress Party, some civil society organizations and nationalist groups within India have also voiced opposition to this policy relaxation, organizing small-scale protests to demand that the Indian government protect domestic enterprises and reject the invasion of Chinese capital. These dissenting voices have placed some pressure on the Modi government's policy implementation. India's relaxation of investment policies toward China as a major development in Sino-Indian economic and trade relations will not only have a profound impact on bilateral economic and trade ties, but will also affect the regional economic landscape and India's domestic industrial development. Its impact is twofold, both short-term and long-term, offering positive momentum while also presenting potential challenges. In terms of its impact on Sino-Indian economic and trade relations, in the short term, the policy relaxation will directly drive a rebound in Chinese direct investment in India, particularly in key sectors such as electric vehicle components, renewable energy, and pharmaceutical intermediates. It is projected that by 2026, Chinese direct investment in India will grow by more than 50%, reaching $800 million to $1 billion. At the same time, the entry of Chinese enterprises will also drive growth in bilateral trade between China and India. It is projected that by 2026, bilateral trade will exceed $120 billion, representing an increase of approximately 15% compared to 2025. In the long term, as policies are gradually implemented and refined, cooperation between China and India in sectors such as manufacturing, energy, and pharmaceuticals will deepen further, forming a closer economic and trade partnership. By 2030, bilateral trade between China and India is projected to exceed $200 billion, with cumulative Chinese direct investment in India reaching over $5 billion. The two sides will achieve deeper integration in industrial and supply chains, realizing mutual benefit and win-win outcomes. Furthermore, the policy relaxation will also drive cooperation between China and India in areas such as technological exchange and talent development, promote the diversified development of bilateral economic and trade relations, alleviate tensions in bilateral relations, and lay the foundation for cooperation in other fields. In terms of its impact on the regional economic landscape, the relaxation of India's investment policies toward China will drive the restructuring of South Asian supply chains, gradually forming a China-India-Southeast Asia trade triangle and reshaping the current economic landscape of South Asia. As the global manufacturing hub, China possesses a complete industrial chain and advanced technology. India boasts a vast market and ample labor force, and Southeast Asia serves as a major global trade hub. The three entities exhibit strong economic complementarity. Following the relaxation of India's investment policies toward China, Chinese enterprises will use the Indian market to further expand trade cooperation with Southeast Asian nations, facilitating the flow of Chinese technology, capital, and products from India into Southeast Asia. Simultaneously, India will leverage China's industrial chain advantages to integrate into the global supply chain and enhance its standing within the regional economy. For example, electric vehicle component manufacturing bases established by Chinese enterprises in India can not only meet domestic demand, but also export to Southeast Asian countries, forming an industrial chain layout of China R&D, India production, Southeast Asia sales. In the renewable energy sector, China, India, and Southeast Asian nations can strengthen cooperation to jointly advance regional energy transition and achieve the optimal allocation of energy resources. Furthermore, the formation of the China-India-Southeast Asia trade triangle will also drive trade, liberalization, and investment facilitation in South Asia, promote regional economic integration, and enhance South Asia's influence in the global economy. In terms of the impact on India's domestic industries, this policy relaxation presents both opportunities and challenges, exerting a dual effect on the domestic sector. On the one hand, the policy relaxation will bring certain competitive pressures to Indian domestic enterprises. Chinese enterprises possess distinct advantages in technology, capital, and industrial chains. Upon entering the Indian market, they will engage in direct competition with local Indian firms, particularly in sectors such as electric vehicle components and renewable energy. Given the gaps in technological capabilities, production efficiency, and product quality between local Indian firms and Chinese enterprises, local firms may face risks such as market share erosion and business closures. For example, Indian electric vehicle component manufacturers are relatively behind in core technology R&D and face higher production costs. With the entry of Chinese firms, which will leverage advanced technology and lower costs to capture a significant market share, local enterprises will face substantial competitive pressure. On the other hand, the policy relaxation will also present significant development opportunities for India's domestic industries, driving technological upgrades and industrial transformation among local firms. The entry of Chinese enterprises will not only bring advanced technology and management expertise, but also promote the refinement of India's domestic industrial supply chains, stimulating the growth of upstream and downstream sectors. For instance, investments by Chinese electric vehicle component manufacturers in India will drive the development of related local industries, such as raw material supply and component processing, thereby forming a complete industrial chain. At the same time, to cope with competition, local enterprises will be compelled to increase R&D investment, improve technological capabilities and product quality, accelerate industrial upgrading, and propel India's manufacturing sector toward high-end and intelligent development. Furthermore, investments by Chinese companies will introduce advanced production equipment and processes to India, elevating the overall standard of the country's manufacturing sector and contributing to the realization of the Make in India initiative. Based on the above analysis, we can offer a clear and comprehensive assessment of India's recent relaxation of investment policies toward China. This policy adjustment is, in essence, a hybrid decision driven primarily by economic necessity and supplemented by strategic considerations. Economic pressures serve as the core driving force behind the policy relaxation, while strategic considerations determine its scope and extent. Domestic political resistance, however, limits the policy's full liberalization. From an economic perspective, India currently faces severe economic challenges, including a slowdown in GDP growth, a decline in foreign exchange reserves, and rising unemployment. This has made attracting foreign investment, introducing technology, and creating jobs urgent priorities for the Indian government. As the world's second largest economy, China possesses ample capital and advanced technology, making it a key partner for India in alleviating economic pressures. Therefore, relaxing investment restrictions on China is an inevitable choice for the Indian government in addressing these economic challenges. From a strategic perspective, this policy relaxation does not represent a fundamental shift in India's strategy towards China, but rather a pragmatic strategic adjustment. Its core objective is to attract Chinese capital and technology, while guarding against the excessive expansion of Chinese influence, thereby achieving a balance between cooperation and containment. This move aims to promote the integration of Make in India with the Belt and Road Initiative, improve bilateral relations, and enhance India's international standing. From a domestic political perspective, due to opposition from the conservative faction within the Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP, and the opposition Indian National Congress, INC, the Indian government cannot fully liberalize its investment policies toward China. Instead, it can only adopt localized and targeted relaxation measures that balance economic needs with political pressures. This also determines the limitations of this policy relaxation. To assess the future trajectory of India's relaxation of investment policies toward China and whether it can truly achieve economic development and strategic objectives, we should focus on 3 key indicators. These indicators will directly reflect the policy's implementation outcomes and the direction of the Indian government's policy. The first key indicator is the volume of investment inflows, specifically whether Chinese direct investment in India will see significant growth following the policy relaxation. If Chinese direct investment in India continues to rebound over the next 1 to 2 years, particularly if investments in key sectors such as electric vehicle components, renewable energy, and pharmaceutical intermediates reach the expected scale, this will indicate that the policy relaxation has yielded tangible results and that the Indian government's economic objectives have been partially achieved. Conversely, if investment inflows do not show significant growth or even decline, it indicates that the policy liberalization has not met expectations. This may be due to Chinese enterprises still harboring concerns about India's policy environment, or domestic political resistance in India hindering the implementation of the policies. The second key indicator is the extent of technology transfer. Specifically, whether Chinese enterprises, after investing in India, can achieve the transfer and diffusion of advanced technologies to help local Indian enterprises enhance their technical capabilities. If Chinese enterprises can establish R&D centers in India, engage in technological cooperation, drive technological upgrades among local enterprises, and improve the industrial chain, this indicates that the policy relaxation has not only facilitated capital inflows, but also achieved technology transfer, thereby providing long-term impetus for the development of India's domestic industries. Conversely, if Chinese enterprises merely establish production bases in India without achieving technology transfer, the role of policy relaxation in promoting India's industrial upgrading will be very limited. The third key indicator is the intensity of political backlash, specifically whether opposition from India's conservative factions, opposition parties, and civil society organizations will continue to escalate and hinder the policy's further implementation. If opposition gradually subsides and the Indian government can smoothly implement the policy or even expand the scope of liberalization, it indicates that the government's policy adjustments have gained broad domestic acceptance and that the policy is sustainable. Conversely, if opposition continues to intensify or even leads to large-scale protests, the Indian government may be forced to adjust its policy and tighten investment restrictions on China, resulting in fluctuations in the policy liberalization process. Given the current situation, the implementation of India's policy relaxation regarding Chinese investment still faces numerous uncertainties. On the one hand, Chinese enterprises remain cautious about India's policy environment. Following investment restrictions since 2020, many Chinese companies harbor concerns about the unpredictability of Indian policies. The cumbersome approval processes and potential political risks. Even with some policy relaxation, they're likely to adopt a cautious investment approach and will not blindly expand their investment scale. On the other hand, domestic political resistance in India persists. Opposition from conservative factions and the opposition parties may continue to hinder the implementation of these policies, and could even lead to policy reversals. Furthermore, the development of Sino-Indian bilateral relations will also affect the effectiveness of policy liberalization. If border issues can be properly resolved and bilateral relations continue to improve, the impact of policy liberalization will be further enhanced. Conversely, if bilateral relations become strained again, it may dampen the enthusiasm of Chinese investors in India, significantly diminishing the effectiveness of policy liberalization. Nevertheless, we must also recognize that China and India possess strong economic complementarity. The combination of Chinese capital and technology with India's market and labor force can achieve mutual benefit and win-win outcomes, which serves as the fundamental driving force for the sustained development of China-India economic and trade cooperation. Although this relaxation of India's investment policies toward China has its limitations, it nonetheless represents a positive signal from the Indian government to China, providing a significant opportunity for the resumption and development of China-India economic and trade cooperation. Chinese enterprises should seize this opportunity. Based on a thorough risk assessment, they should actively engage in cooperation within the Indian market, particularly in key sectors open to investment, to leverage their technological and industrial strengths. In doing so, they can achieve their own development while simultaneously helping to upgrade India's domestic industries. As for the Indian government, it should further improve the policy environment, enhance policy stability and transparency, and address the investment concerns of Chinese enterprises. At the same time, it must effectively balance domestic political resistance to ensure the smooth implementation of policy liberalization, thereby achieving a win-win outcome for both economic development and strategic objectives. For both China and India, this policy relaxation should serve as an opportunity to strengthen bilateral communication and cooperation, alleviate geopolitical tensions, and promote the sustained and healthy development of Sino-Indian economic and trade relations, thereby contributing to the recovery and development of the global economy. Overall, India's relaxation of investment policies toward China represents a pragmatic choice made under economic pressure and a rational strategic adjustment. It is neither a fundamental shift in its China strategy nor a simple short-term compromise, but rather a hybrid decision that balances economic needs, strategic objectives, and political realities. In the future, as these policies are gradually implemented and bilateral relations between China and India continue to improve, Sino-Indian economic and trade cooperation is expected to usher in new opportunities for development. However, it will also need to address numerous challenges, including domestic political resistance and policy uncertainty. We will continue to monitor changes in three key indicators to observe the future trajectory of India's investment policies toward China and the development prospects of Sino-Indian economic and trade relations.